I've changed this slide deck slightly to not include a set number, and perhaps a caveat, just because you use a recruiter to find a job, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can get a guaranteed 30k pay rise. So if that's all that you were hoping for, I'm sorry, that's not necessarily going to be covered fully in this. So I guess we'll start with a bit about me. So I've been in the recruitment industry for about 10 years. Like a lot of people who end up in security, I recruited across a lot of different verticals, started in systems, so lots of systems admins, Linux people, networking, found my way into recruiting software engineers, did that for a few years, and then started doing security about 5 or 6 years ago. And initially it was probably 10% of what I did was security, and over the years it became more and more, and now it's all that I do. I'm a career recruiter. What does that mean? I'm not here just to make a quick placement, so I do my best to not be a dick. It doesn't necessarily land all the time. So for context, for people who are unfamiliar with how recruitment works, I'll give you a really basic overview. So a company's hiring for a skill set. Maybe they've got an internal talent team, maybe they don't. They've got referrals from people who work there, but at one point it becomes unscalable to just leverage those services. So they'll engage a business like ours, and there's a commercial agreement between the two businesses. Something I want to cover here for anybody that's unfamiliar, and something that's really important to know, if you do go through a recruitment agency to get your role, the budget for that role and the fee that we get paid is a separate thing. So it doesn't mean that if a role is paying $100,000 and we're going to get paid, that you're going to get like $80,000 or something. It doesn't work like that. It's completely two separate budgets, just for context. So before we get into the ins and outs of how I can help you, I'll probably talk about how I can add value to you through your job search, or if you're a company looking for somebody to hire. So if you're a client, I can give you insights about maybe what your competitors are paying, what they're looking to hire for skill set wise. That's probably the biggest one. You know, I have clients quite often reach out to me, and I'd call it a sanity check. They'll be like, hey, we're trying to find a security engineer. What do you think we need to pay that role at? And I can give them some real data from actual people that I've spoken to. If you're a job searcher, or what we in the industry would refer to as a candidate, recruiters love to buy people coffees and beers and lunches, so take advantage of that. You know, if you're ever in the city and you want to catch up with a recruiter, they'll definitely say yes, I'd say. But on the other side of things, we work on roles that other companies don't get. They won't be advertised directly. So yeah, definitely engage with recruiters where possible. Also, we can give you advice on salary, same as we would for clients. Or if you're at a crossroads in your career, or you don't know what role makes sense next, reach out and have a conversation. Now this slide I'd direct personally to our company and my team. We do bespoke research, so we've got a marketing team who trawl through data to find trends of what people are looking for. We also run surveys across our whole database of candidates. They run that twice. They run it just on traditional IT people. They run it also just on the people for security. So once every year we put together a report on what the previous 12 months look like. We look at salary trends, which every company does on their wrap. But within that, something that I'd highlight in the last 12 months, we started doing our benchmarking for salaries and had to re-benchmark them within about 3 or 4 months because that accelerated so much. So I'd suggest if you're a hiring manager in this room and you've lost somebody out of your team, it's quite possible to rehire that person with the same caliber of skill sets. You're probably going to have to pay higher. And that's what the right-hand side of that slide talks to. You know, most people, when they're changing roles, are going up by about 20%. So if you're replacing somebody like for like, they might cost 20% more than they did in the role previously. Something to highlight as well off our research there, the people in security have got different wants and needs to people in more general IT. So training, and particularly training, is a really big want for people. And it's not training and nothing else, it's training and work-life balance. or training and a good salary, or training and career progression. So some things to note there. So perhaps some important things to know for anybody in the audience there who's ever been looking for a job. Recruiters passively search for people, so we're not sitting on Seek and waiting for people to come to us. If you've ever had a message on LinkedIn, which I'm sure the majority of you people have, it's because we're passively going out and looking to find people to fill roles. Security in particular as a vertical, if I put an ad on Seek, I'll be lucky to get 10 applicants, 2 of which are in Australia. So more and more that's a platform that people use from a recruitment industry perspective to find you. So if you want to be noticed by recruiters, you should update your LinkedIn. You should update your resume if it's on Seek, because whether or not you know this, recruiters can actually go into Seek's database and download your CV. So if you've ever had an email from Seek saying someone from Talenza's downloaded your CV, well, it might have been me, but that would be why, because you've come up as a good match for a particular role. Another thing you should do if you want to be noticed by people like myself is go to events like this, and when you go to those events, you should talk to people, you should network. It sounds like a really basic thing, but that's why we're all here, right? Come to these events, meet people, understand the industry a little bit better. If you're somebody who's trying to get into the industry, you should speak to the stuff that's on the right there. Include what you're trying to learn, include your home lab, and I like to use the analogy of maybe Goldilocks and leaving trail of breadcrumbs. Make it really obvious. Don't try to lead them towards what you're trying to do. You should call it out. If you want to get a job as a security analyst or you want to get into incident response, you should talk about that. Don't try to leave things open to interpretation. Make it really obvious what you're looking for. Next slide is how do I get paid more, right? So everyone wants to know. Everyone wants to get paid more for what they're doing. A few things that I'd point out here. Do your research. What do I mean by that? Speak to your colleagues, speak to your friends in the network, speak to recruiters, find out what roles are paying, look up ads on Seek, LinkedIn, wherever the roles are advertised. Before you start looking for a job, try and work out where you think your next role is going to get paid. If you're somebody with 1 year's experience, don't expect that you're going to get paid $150,000 or $200,000 in your next role necessarily. You might be a superstar, so don't take that as gospel, but be realistic. Be realistic about where you're going to land. It doesn't mean that because you're on 100 doesn't mean you can't jump to 150, sure, but if you're 1 year into your career, is that really realistic? I like to use this one about don't window shop. What do I mean by that? Like, don't go into an interview process and go 5 interviews in or whatever it might be if you're not really serious about taking the role. I'll caveat that, and I know Amazon have sponsored this event, so apologies in advance. If you're in a process with those guys and you want to do their 5 interviews or 7 interviews to see if you can pass through it, I can understand with that. But for most companies, the company's going to get very invested in hiring you. If you do multiple interviews and it leaves a sour taste in everybody's mouth, if you go all the way through a process that you were never seriously going to consider. So I'd say don't do that. Speak to your manager. Sounds like a strange one, right? Why would I speak to my manager? Well, you might be able to get paid more money where you are. You could be like, hey, this recruiter from Talenza keeps messaging me about these security engineer roles that I could go for, and he's saying I could get paid 30 grand more than I'm getting here. Like, is there a conversation we can have about what it would take to increase my salary? And something I'll say here, which is maybe backwards, I'm saying to do that before you've got another offer. The reason I'd suggest to do that is, well, if you've got a problem where you're working and the company knows that they can change that, they'll do it. If they can pay you more to keep you engaged, they'll probably do it. Also, if you have that conversation before you start looking and then they go to offer you more money when you leave, you'll be like, well, we had this conversation a few months ago and it didn't go anywhere. So I started looking and here we are. I want to give some additional backstory here, and I apologise in advance. I had planned to have some gaps in between for questions, but we'll probably do that at the end. I want to just kind of talk through a process of what somebody good in recruitment would do for you if you were going through the process with them. So we would send your CV forward for a role with context about what you do and why you're good for the role, and then you'd get selected for an interview. So presumably by that point, everything a recruiter's can do for you is done, right? They've sent you in, see you later, good luck. Well, somebody good in the industry won't do that. They'll give you what I would term interview preparation. I'll tell you a story about how I came about kind of developing my process for this. I read an article about 6 or 7 years ago about someone from the internal talent team at Google who was talking about how much prep work they gave people going for, I think it was software engineering roles with Google. They gave like a big A4 sheet worth of prep, some of the questions that they were going to get asked, what the manager liked, how they liked you to answer questions, all this sort of backstory. And I remember looking at myself going, well, this person works for Google. I want to recruit for companies like Google. If the person who works there internally is doing that and I'm doing less than that, then how good a job am I doing? So I would always give like briefing notes, some context about the role and the manager. If I've had multiple people interview there in the past, I'll probably give you some, hey, they might ask you some questions about this. These are the types of answers that they like to hear. I'll try to help you win, basically. Here's some example of briefing notes. I won't just work off a job spec, so if a company asks me to recruit for them and they're like, here's a job description, go and find it, I'll be like, no thanks, it's fine. I'll make sure that I can get some buy-in from the client, have some time with them, get a bit of context about what the role is, because job descriptions don't generally do a very good job of selling a role. And something that I'd position here as well, if you're in the industry and a recruiter sends you a message about a role and you just ask for the job description, they're probably not going to be that engaged with you. So if you're actually interested in the role, you should be like, oh yeah, let's have a conversation about it, or send me some details around it that isn't just the job spec. Because if somebody has asked for a job description, they're probably not that interested, and the role really won't sell it very well. And just for context, I won't show the actual job description for this, but the job description for this role didn't mention the word Splunk at all. So this was a role for a security engineer. They called the role security analyst. They spoke about everything to do with a security analyst, so log analysis, everything like that. Nothing to do with engineering the SIEM. So hence why JDs perhaps aren't the best sales process for a role. Some tips for how to interview. This stuff seems really basic. There's a theory that's been around or a methodology that's been around for structuring your answers when you get asked them in an interview. It's often referred to as the CAR or the STAR methodology. I always say CAR because it's easier and it's circumstance, action, and response. People are particularly good, results. People are particularly good at talking about the first two parts of that. So to put it into context, I was a security analyst for the team. I found an alert that kept coming up. I automated that. That would be where somebody would often end the answer, right? What a business wants to hear is how you've saved them money or you've made them money. That's it. So a business outcome in that context was, I was an analyst at the team, I found a detection that kept coming up, I wrote an automated script or wrote a detection for that and built that into our SIEM platform that saved the analyst, 10 hours per month in terms of detections. And it's going that one little step further to contextualize how a business or a manager is going to get benefit from what you've done. I'd also say the same about your resume. Always talk about the actual results from what you did instead of just what you did. Operation Human Shield, what do I mean by that? So use a recruiter to save you from yourself, I've got a really good story about somebody who interviewed at Atlassian years ago. It's quite a few years ago, so it should be fairly safe to share this one. And he went rogue at one point through the process and started negotiating directly with the client and asked what I would put as not the smartest questions, but if those questions had been directed through us, we could massage what they were saying to make them not look like an idiot. So use us is what I would say on that side. I'll reiterate here what I said earlier. You know, if you were going through a multi-stage interview process, I'd have different preparation that I'd give you through each one. This is who you're interviewing with. This is what they'll focus on. This is what they'll be looking to get out of that. And then I'll debrief with you, debrief with the client as well. And again, re-clarify that you're still interested. I think it's, I don't know if everybody in recruitment does this, but I think that interaction is really important. Like I'm your ally in trying to get you into your new role, or if you're a company, I'm your ally in trying to get you to hire that person. Like, work with me. I'm not your enemy. I'm here to help you, right? Next slide. So you went for an interview and you stuffed it up. Happens, right? Life's not over. You know, everybody's failed interviews before. I'd tell me a friend actually who works in the security team at Atlassian. I know personally, he told me the story about how he went for multiple interviews at the other big tech companies and failed them. And he thought there was no chance he was going to get through, but got back on the bike. I put at the top here to be self-critical. Now, I don't mean that in a way to be negative about yourself. I mean more like analyse your performance. What did I do well in that interview? They asked me that question. It was a technical question. I answered that wrong. How could I have answered that better? So the next time that you have an interview, you can nail it. Also, use the feedback that the company or the recruiter gives you constructively. Take it on board. Again, be self-critical. Look at ways you can improve your performance on that. So you got the offer. What do you do now, right? So by this point, you've done 2 or 3 interviews. You've had multiple conversations with me. You should have had a conversation with your partner and your family. If you haven't, why haven't you done that? Like, you wouldn't buy a house without talking to your wife or talking to your parents or whoever your circle of trust is. You should definitely do that by that point. And I would always advise 2 things. Either accept or decline the offer. Now, within that, yes, there might be some negotiation that you could have around the package and those types of things, sure. Or take a couple of days to think about it, sure. But don't sit there and and ah for a week or 2 weeks or something like that, because it generally won't work out well. And again, this will sound like I'm repeating what I said earlier. Don't go and speak to your current manager before you've decided whether you're going to take that role. Like, you should have done that weeks ago before you started this interview process, because any hiring manager in this room will just tell you they'll pay you more money to stay. If it's like, oh, you need 10 grand, sure, we'll pay you that. You could have saved yourself the hassle of going through 5 or 6 interviews or whatever it was through multiple stages. So again, do that before you search. Save yourself the hassle, save the bad blood from the potential employer and the industry in general. A question I get asked often is, I've got 2 offers or 3 offers. How do you decide between them? You know, I would always say look at more than just the base salary. You know, look at it as an overall picture. Maybe one of them's got a great training package. Maybe one of them's got a great manager that you really want to work with. The package or the overall picture of that role isn't just about the dollars. Which one's going to make you work harder in a good way? Which one's going to push you? Weigh all of those things up. Have conversations. Speak to maybe not your colleagues in your current environment, but speak to your network. Speak to the recruiter. Like, if somebody was to ask me and they say, hey, I've got this other offer, what do you think? I'll tell them my honest take on it. So have a look at more than just the dollars and find what works best and then make your call on that. This slide, I kind of rehashed what I just said about the overall package. And probably weigh up before you go into that process. Is base salary the most important? Is that what you want more than anything? And if that's the case, it's really easy when you get to offer stage. That one's paying the most, so just go with it. But yeah, do they have work from home? They got training, bonus, what's the culture like? All of those things. Look at the overall piece. The next slide is one that I have strong opinions on. I'll try to save them a little bit from this audience, but counter-offer, right? It's always going to happen. You're going to get offered more money to stay. And my advice would always be not to take one, partially because I'm incentivized for you to change roles, but also if money is just going to make you stay there and the only thing that you're staying for is money, generally speaking, it won't keep you for very long. And I've seen people, 6 months later that leave anyway. So if it is just about money, have the conversation before you start interviewing elsewhere. Save yourself that hassle. I do have, in fact, I won't go through it. I've got examples I could give on that. I just hate counter-offers in general. So some key takeaways, right? The industry, or the good people in the recruitment industry, we're your friends. Use us up as a resource. Take advantage of the information that we've got. Engage with us. I pride myself on being part of the community. I've obviously got asked to talk here today, which is a huge honour for me. But I'm part of the OWASP Sydney meetup group. I help them host their events. Be honest with recruiters. Be honest with yourself about what's realistic for what you want as well. And don't be a dick, right? Give respect and you get respect back. We spoke a little bit about this earlier on. If you're trying to get into the industry, what would the advice be? Look, study, practice, improve your skills as much as you can. Find your passion within security, which can be hard to do if you aren't trying different things. And network. Go to events like this. Sec Talks runs once a month, generally in person. OWASP is running an event just about every month. There's a few other ones that are running in Sydney. Go along to those, meet people, network, have chats with people, get a feel for what you like. Next slide's probably a little bit of a brag one about us as a company, but we're involved with these events. My colleague up in Brisbane is part of the AWS network up there. We're sponsoring B-Sides next week. We're up at CrikeyCon. Obviously, we're here today. So I would say good people in recruitment will be part of your community, and they'll be at these events and networking. And I think for time, we've got time for a couple of questions, yeah?
Yes.
Because I haven't stopped for a breath. So let me just grab a drink.
Well, if you have questions for Riki, now's a great chance, questions, to ask them. We've got a fair bit of time, so if you want to ask them, have a think and we'll get to them.
Thanks, Riki. I had a question about the things you shouldn't say during your recruitment process. You mentioned it earlier, but can you give some examples?
Like during an interview process, do you mean?
Yeah, to not make yourself look dumb, like you said.
Yeah, I would never, in an interview process with a client, you could say it with a recruiter, but I would never say it with a client, say that you're changing roles just because of money, because it's never well received. Unless, the one caveat I'd say for that, which isn't relevant for your own situation, but say you were here on a migrant visa and the company that you were working for was one of the companies who takes advantage of that situation, and they may be paying you, a third of what you're worth, then it might be okay, but that's probably one of the big no-nos, is to talk about that. I think you want to talk about long-term career development on the flip side of that, like, hey, I've reached the ceiling of where I am technically. They're not offering me the support to get into the next role that I want to do for 5 years or something like that. That's probably the one I'd highlight the most. We probably have a conversation afterwards as well. There's probably a few more that I can share.
We have time for a few more questions, if anyone... Oh, yep.
Since COVID, the work from home and remote working's been pretty much kind of like a standard, or there's been a strong move to working from home and remote. Have you seen any movement in the other direction now that the pandemic is largely over?
Yeah, massively. I think you particularly in enterprise, most enterprise companies are pushing for 2 or 3 days a week in office. And once you've given something to your team, it's hard to take that away. So you've given them the option to work from home full time, or the need during the pandemic, right? And now you're trying to get them back into the office. It can be quite difficult. One of the things and in fact it came up in our last cyber report that we did, the average tenure that people are doing over the last year has dropped by like half a year, went from I think 1.8 years to 1.4. So that means people are staying for like 15 months on average. I can't help but think that remote working, I'm a big advocate for hybrid, don't get me wrong, but I think a big part of why people are changing roles so quickly is everybody's so isolated now. You can jump on a Zoom call and have like 5 interviews without somebody even knowing. You don't have to make a reason up to leave the office for an hour to go. So you're far less invested, and I think you're less invested in your teams is probably a negative from COVID. But to loop back to your original question, definitely there's a push to have people back in. Maybe less so in security though.
Awesome. Are there any more final questions for Riki while we've got him?
Thank you, Riki. So now with the current economic situations and a lot of big companies laying off people, do you see that in the recruitment space, like a lot of people looking for positions or risk changes?
Are more people looking to change now than previously? Is that your question reframed another way? Is it? I kind of misheard the middle part of that, sorry, mate.
I'm saying more like if you see a lot of people trying to find new positions or changing companies.
Sure. Look, in the last 12 months, I think there's a lot of movement in the industry. It's quite interesting, the trends that we saw in recruitment are particularly busy and what I would term as like frothy, a bit like the real estate market was. For 6 or 12 months, it seemed like everybody changed roles. As the interest rates have gone up and I guess money's become less available for companies as well as for people, we're probably seeing less people the last month or two. Prior to that, it was madness. Like everyone was changing like mad, I'd say. And companies were hiring. New roles were coming up everywhere. But with all the rounds of redundancies that are being announced by these big tech companies, I think everybody's kind of treading water a little bit, I'd say.
Well, thank you, Riki, for your insights. It's been a pleasure to have you at Hack Sydney. We'd like to thank you with a gift. Let's give Riki a round of applause.